Mogesalmebit, Kalbatonebo Dabatonebo, Tiknak Farunak, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Arsen Kharatian. I will be chairing this panel. I want to welcome once again all of our colleagues, thank the organizers for giving this opportunity. For me, as somebody who lives in Georgia for a number of years now and comes from Armenia, it's especially interesting to see such a diverse and full of expertise crowd. The session will be in English. The reason is our speakers both are going to speak in English. And I will briefly introduce our speakers, but before getting there, I would suggest that we try to have a more of a lively and discussion-based panel. We have two distinguished and very much experienced panelists here. To my right is Ms. Salpi Eskidjan Widert. Did I spell Widert? Swedish, yes. Who has a long experience in a very interesting area that is in my personal interest as well. Somebody who comes from conflict resolution background, conflict transformation background, and has been dealing with the conflicts in the region of South Caucasus. I think we have a very, very good chance to hear the experience of the others, especially that of the Cyprus, especially that of the Israeli-Palestinian dialogue, and what role can religion and faith play in constructive dialogue. Many people who are aware of conflict resolution mechanisms and tools know about track 1, track 2, or multi-track for that matter. And I think we have a great opportunity to hear from a great expert who currently is the executive coordinator of the Office of the Religious Track of the Cyprus Peace Process, but has a long experience. Again, as I mentioned, I will not go one-on-one on the bio of Ms. Salpi, but has a very rich experience both in the Mediterranean and in the Middle East, as well as North Europe. With a great educational background, coming also from the same area, both in Europe and the United States. Our second speaker, who I also want to welcome in Armenia, we were just discussing of how exciting it is to be in a country of a post-revolution, in a region with a lot of interesting processes, is representing the UNHCR office in Armenia, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee Office. Ms. Anna Karinost is representing the UN here today, who also has previous experience of working both in East Europe and in Africa, and who has been dealing with, I believe, not only the refugee issues, but also with conflicts. So without further ado, once again, I will welcome our speakers, and will suggest them to keep it within maybe 15 to 20 minutes, so that we can open the floor and have a discussion with the participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you to everyone for the invitation. It's a great honor to be here among you, and also important for us to get out of our little corner of the Eastern Mediterranean and to listen to another context in that sense. So I'm grateful for the presentation, as well as to the organizers. I'm here to share with you an experience from Cyprus, which is a divided island, where for the last 10 years the religious leaders of the island have turned a new page of history. I will share with you the context of what brought this about, and give you a few of the achievements and challenges. Things are not perfect and rosy, it's a process, but just to tell you where we've made the changes. First of all, I should say that Cyprus is a small island, but it's complicated. Everything that everything that looks simple gets complicated in our island. It is a crossroads of 3 continents, Europe, Africa, and Middle East. And it's defined by 2 main ethnic communities, Greek and Turkish. But that doesn't mean that that's the only ones who live there, but that's everything is concerned about is the bicommunal, is the 2. Demographies are very important also, because we talk about majority and minority. The Greek population is a majority population. The Turkish population is a minority. And even that concept it's full of contention as such. The constitution, which was brought together in 1960, recognizes three religious minorities, which include the Armenians, the Maronites, and the Latin, both being from the Catholic rite. Armenians it's not a religion, but it's recognized that way in the constitution. The identity is very much hyphenated. So when you talk to someone, you say, where are you from? There's always this hyphen. I'm Greek Cypriot, I'm Turkish Cypriot, I'm Armenian Cypriot. So you can tell already from there that it's an island where the ethnic part is almost an orphan, because you have another respective motherland where you have another connection to all the time. Which in 1960, when Cyprus became independent, it has three guarantor powers, and that kind of also, it's not just the respective motherlands, but the former colonial power, Great Britain, Greece and Turkey came together to guarantee the peace agreement that was made, and said that in order for this constitution to hold, we will act as that, which is also a very anachronistic thing within the European Union, which we don't have. Cyprus became independent in 1960, but already in 1963, there was intercommunal strife. So there was, that already 3 years later. Constitutionally, there was a disagreement because the constitution gave veto power to the minority, to the Turkish Cypriots. So any decision that the majority made, the other one vetoes it. Of course, things don't work out. Cyprus is not a religious conflict. So when we talk of religion, it's not even though the Greek community is majority Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox family, and the Turkish Cypriots are Sunni Islam, actually extremely staunchly secular as such, but still that's their faith. But Cyprus is not a religious conflict. However, religion has played and does play a huge role in the whole island. There is a very big asymmetry in the kind of role religion plays. One, because the Greek Orthodox, the Church of Cyprus, has had a very predominant role in both during the Ottoman times, the struggle against colonialization against the British, as well as the Ottoman times, while the Turkish Cypriot community, Islam is not so important in their identity, very much a secular Atatürk experience of, almost, religion is almost pushed in the private sphere, which is also simplified, because when you look at the conflict, it's not exactly that way. Between 1960 and 64, you see messages that there were mixed villages where Greeks and Turkish Cypriots lived together, where religious feasts were celebrated in such a way that if there was Easter, a Turkish Cypriot would also go there, or you've seen Turkish Cypriot Muslims going and lighting candles. It's cultural more than religious, and vice versa. So during the Bayrams and the Eids, you would have Greek Orthodox sharing together, but it was very much on a cultural, religious, in a community base. It doesn't mean that was the politics around. When the intercommunal strife started and there was killing and violence, that divided the community into enclaves. And then, the old stories have also come out, plus the truth, what happened to each other is not something that's discussed. So there are two different narratives. One story is being told by one community, another story is being told by another community. So impunity, where violence and killing goes unpunished, continues throughout generations to take different dimensions, different elements. In 1974, I'm just giving you a fast picture. 1974, there was a Greek military junta in power, and there was a coup that was to be able to outcry the Greek Cypriot, the President of the Republic of Cyprus, who happened to be Greek Cypriot, who happened to also be the head of the Church of Cyprus. So the first President of the Republic happened to be also the head of the Church of Cyprus. That in itself, you can see the elements when you look at peace building. What are the images? You can't be the head of one and the other one in a state where supposedly church and state is separated. That gave an impetus to one of the guarantor powers, in the case of Turkey, to use its constitutional right to say that as my community now is in trouble and there is insecurity, I will intervene to protect my community, to maintain peace. Those terminologies are recognized differently by the different communities. For the Greek Cypriots, that has been an invasion. For the Turkish Cypriots, that's a peace operation. Security Council resolution says that it is a matter of invasion and occupation, so that you will see that one community continuously uses Security Council resolutions in international law as such, while the other one considers that this is the time when I felt safe and I was able to get together. However, what happened was that there was a military intervention, so it wasn't a peace operation as such, because there was military, there was tanks, there was rapes, there was killings, there was lootings, and there was a displacement of people where you had Turkish Cypriots from the southern part pushed to or told with fear, moved to the north, and Greek Cypriots were pushed to the south. And then the island, with the ceasefire line, 37% of the island gets divided and it's under control. So the northern part is controlled by Turkish military, which after a while also declares its independence, only recognized by Turkey, that creating another dimension of the problem. So division becomes very much absolute. 2003, there is a unilateral opening of the checkpoints of the ceasefire line, a couple of them, and Turkish Cypriot authorities opened up and said, you're welcome to come in. So until then, until 2003, there was no movement that was across the buffer zone, which also meant, if we come back to freedom of religion or belief, etc., is that you get only from the Greek Orthodox 557 religious monuments in the northern part, completely under the control of Turkish Cypriot Authority, also Armenian, as well as Maronite and Latin Christian, as well as others, while Muslim places of worship, mosques, as well as cemeteries, vice versa, get under the authority and administration of the Greek Cypriots. Now, gradually with time, because also there is enmity, so religion becomes a victim of this, because it's not, there is no discussion even of respecting the other's faith, because it's like as if it is the enemy line. So some of the monuments basically are left to perish, others are deliberately misused as stables, as or cultural centers. At best, I can say cleaned up and used as places of worship, but not as places of worship of what is meant to be, but a church being used as a mosque when the rightful owner and the person does not, is also another wound in the whole division and the conflict. And that goes on in such a way that it also divides up the communities, and you see that the religious leaders of the religious communities do not talk to each other, do not see each other. So yes, it's not a religious conflict, but with the victimization, they also have a role, they have a voice. So one sees themselves as a victim, and the other is the aggressor, and religion kind of plays into it. At the same time, track one, as we talked about, is going on, the peace talks. The peace talks, which are UN-led, have been a process where, ups and downs as all, talks, but has been a very closed process of leader-led, the two sides talking together and not really bringing the community to accompany that. So the idea is that you get the two to agree on the points that there is as a top approach, and then reconciliation will be something that will come to, which we all know in conflict transformation and peace building, that's really, when there's so much pain, we're giving you like a little, snippets at this stage. You can't have an agreement and expect the people to kind of jump in and own this and build trust when there is no trust, when there is no seeing each other. And even when the checkpoints open and there was the crossing, you see one part of it, some going, but not majority, there's fear of the other. In that case, 2004 was an important part because it's the first time where the two leaders, Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot, came to an agreement. That had never happened before. But within the agreement and in the process, what was locked was the concept of referendum, that whatever is agreed upon will go to the two communities for a referendum. So the people were so-called prepared in a very short time with a very difficult 80-page constitutional document, which people like us read it, but I couldn't imagine anyone, unless it's translated, it's given to the people to understand all the nuances, were there to vote yes or no, which meant that people who are in power or people who have a voice, media, religion, church, mosque, whatever, could also form opinions. They're opinion builders. So in that short period, the communities that divided into two, Greek and Turkish Cypriots, were asked to vote yes or no. Overwhelmingly, the Turkish Cypriot voted yes for the agreement, and while overwhelmingly the Greek Cypriots voted no. This kind of shocked the international community because, what is this? It's such a good document, it's all well prepared, and in a way, what happened was the Greeks became penalized for saying no and whatever else, and that became another division among the two because we were not able to have a consensus on a community level. We weren't able to demonstrate together. We weren't able to come. It was all done separately. I was working at the World Council of Churches then, and I was asked by the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches, I was working in the International Affairs Department, could you please understand and analyze and explain to us, because we will be asked to make a position, what happened and what made the Church of Cyprus, the predominant member church, Greek Orthodox, call its people to vote no, because they did say that we don't trust, and they told their people we don't trust this. So we started the process of analyzing and looking at that, and there I can tell you that, I'll give you two examples and you'll understand, that if you leave people out of the table, you cannot expect those people to trust the process. So you see that also in the polls, women have not trusted the process, because women are not at the table. People of belief have not been there, so nobody has consulted them, and the attitude of the international community as well as the leadership was, but there's no point, this is not a religious conflict, why should we have to talk to them? That will happen after there's an agreement with them, then they'll come in. It doesn't work like that. So, and that kind of, it was a huge blow. We looked there and we also saw that there was never an attempt made to bring those religious leaders together, even if they don't see themselves as equals, even if they're different, be it Armenian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Maronite Catholic, Latin Catholic, Turkish Muslims, they'd never sat in the same room, they never looked at each other, they never talked. This was a complete difficult area to touch. Nobody would dare to touch that because it was doomed to fail. You wouldn't bring them together. So international community who funded so-called civil society, development, non-governmental, looked at with those groups that agreed together. So it's always those that already agree with each other came together. So there were, different initiatives coming up, and in Cyprus, civil society is only now growing. Civil society concept is very much political party oriented. It's not a vibrant civil society like we're seeing here. It's getting there, but it's not. It's always been the state and the political parties and trade unions. And we decided that this was time to do something that was the untouchable and to bring the religious leaders together and to explore ways. So we designed a whole, a concept of working with religion and the role of religion in peace building, based it very much on human rights and freedom of religion or belief, to look at the elements very carefully, to see if there was a space where they could come together. And the methodology we used was very much the quiet diplomacy. This was not the space to put anybody in an embarrassing situation, nor to condemn, but to understand their fears, their understandings, bilaterally, monocommunally, gradually, very slow, patient process, quiet, no frills, no tweeting, no Facebook, absolutely nothing, no media, but with the understanding that that person that we're talking to, religious leader, also made that agreement together, and we started that. This was a Swedish politician presented this to his government. We felt that it had to be a process where a government, it had to be an outside accompaniment. This is not something that the locals could do completely alone. We needed a safe space to meet that was not the space that had ever been explored. It had to be a non-NATO country. It had to be a country that has no colonial history. It has not selling arms. It has no area where it has any point that one side will feel that is uncomfortable. Because we've had that case in Cyprus in 1980s, when it was my time when we were getting all excited and we were out in the streets demonstrating, but the civil society was funded by the US. And not that it was bad funding, but people got branded. You were a CIA agent, you were whatever, everybody was branded, you were a traitor, you couldn't come together. So Sweden in that sense was kosher. It had no story, it was not out of non-military alliances, and Sweden agreed, and the ambassador said, my house is open for quiet process if they agree. The process was that nothing would be defined from outside, no sentence, no process in the whatever would come from Sweden or anybody else. It had to be local. I being the local one in the process, but I'm neither Greek nor Turkish, which also helped. I'm Armenian origin, so that also meant that I could come in. But I could not be seen the same by the Turkish Cypriots as the Greek Cypriots. So there was also a weakness in my case that my family has come to. I'm second generation Cypriot. My family came to Cyprus as a result of the Armenian genocide and massacres and movements. So all these terminologies, all these words, doesn't mean that one side can accept me. So I was a shadow for about 2 years. He was still the Swede. Nobody knew that I existed. And we had to prepare the grounds. And the ground got prepared. And I have to give credit to the Archbishop of the current Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Church of Cyprus, Archbishop Chrysostomos II, because his beatitude took a very practical approach. He's known and perceived as a very hardline person. He's labeled as somebody who is not the one of dialogue. And that also is something that's, because if you get that person to talk and to be at the table, you get wider. And he did want to talk. And he was very easy, closed process. We developed an agenda together with him and then reached out to the Turkish Cypriots. Totally different formula. I will not get into the detail there, but we can discuss it in the when we can talk. And also, there was openness. Unfortunately, 6 months through, while everything was being built and prepared, there was elections in the so-called Turkish Cypriot community, which meant that a new leader was there and the Mufti was ousted. And that meant that every work that we had done for 6 months and a year and a half kind of stopped, and there was a freezing period. And then the Holy Spirit guided us again, because in this place it was really. And 6 months later, a man gets appointed as Mufti of Cyprus, who's the current Mufti now, Dr. Talip Atalay, a man with good education, very well educated, had experience living with and working with Christians as a sociologist in his background, and immediately ready to pick up and even take it further. So by 2011, we were ready to bring them together in the buffer zone. Cyprus has a buffer zone where it's neither side controls, it's a UN controlled, where they came for a closed process and to see if they could meet together and see if they could even say hello to each other. They did. The fact that the Archbishop of the Church of Cyprus acknowledged the Mufti was the biggest success. He acknowledged someone that is not recognizable. That's the Greek Cypriots will not acknowledge the other because it's like acknowledging a breakaway state. And that process in itself, was ways, but with the understanding that there was no media, nobody knew about this happened, but we knew that. And at that meeting, no agenda from our side as facilitation, they decided that they would like to have a youth event, and which we were surprised, and the Swedish embassy was like, well, this is not what we were expecting. Everybody thought it was our idea, it was not. And they said, you know what, why don't we bring young people together? Because it's not our generation. Let's look at 15, 17-year-olds who have never experienced the conflict, neither the intercommunal strife nor the war. And let's get them together and let's bring Israeli and Palestinians because of me. They said, she has experience, so let her bring another conflict to complicate the matters more, which we thought, okay. So in 3 months, I was given a task, which was an interesting one, to find 10 young people, 10 Israeli, 10 Palestinian Christian and Muslim, 10 Turkish Cypriot, and 10 Greek Cypriot, including Armenian, Latin, and Maronite, where they would never met together, had never crossed, who came from families who were not meeting with one another, where we would have a 1-week residential workshop, where they would see if they could learn to each other. These kids came together. I cannot tell you the process. Their first messages of each other were killers, stereotypes. They've never even experienced that together. With that, I'd like to show you 6 minutes of that so you can just kind of see the image. And Nicola has kindly agreed to show you that.
Religion, like everything else, is divided in Cyprus. The religious leadership of the Greek and Turkish Cypriot communities had not met or talked to one another for decades. The Swedish facilitation brought the current two leaders together for the first time ever in 2011, known as the religious track of the Cyprus peace process, which is underway. This is an essential element of conflict resolution and peace building in Cyprus. For the first time ever, Christian and Muslim youth from the Greek and Turkish Cypriot communities come together for an interreligious youth encounter for peace. They are joined by Israeli and Palestinian, Jewish, Muslim and Christian youth from Jerusalem and Bethlehem. The encounter is supported by the two religious heads of the island. The 40 teenagers meet for the first time. They're filled with terrible images and horrific stereotypes of one another's community. They are curious and willing. At first, they approach each other with reluctance. The Greek and Turkish Cypriot youth talk of negative events that were never experienced by themselves, but seem part of their everyday reality transported through different interpretations of the past. Collective and yet selective memories of two intertwined communities filled with mutual mistrust, fear and insecurity, sadly divided by history.
This 30 years ago was a Cypriot land. Now it's a Turkish.
Well, Turkey doesn't...
30 years ago there wasn't a flag on this mountain.
Well, they're right, but as long as they have the Greek flag, we're not going to tear out the Turkish flag. They have the Greek flag there as well, so it's being two-faced.
They are united temporarily, living and studying together in Nicosia, the divided capital of the little Mediterranean island, where destruction, division and differences have become part of its psyche and terrain for the last 6 decades. The youth witness together the mutual destruction visible all over the island, which stands in the way of peace. Churches, monasteries and mosques have fallen victim to human folly. Places of worship to so many where once community was celebrated, and cemeteries where the dead were laid to rest are desecrated and left to perish. Precious cultural heritage of humankind stands silently against the wind of desertion and deliberate obstruction, while attempts to restore and protect them struggle on. Teenagers demonstrated that no barbed wires, no twisted history, no power politics can stand between human relations. Strengthened by their faith and knowledge of each other's religious teachings, they were able to overcome decades of hatred. Giant stereotypes crumbled before their eyes like sandcastles. The Interreligious Youth Encounter demonstrated that positive differences can be achieved in the Cyprus conflict by engaging with the faith communities of the island. If given the needed support, they can provide an alternative vision that can change the current discourse in Cyprus and bring a much-needed hope. The youth want to inspire others to join them and to give them hope that peace is not only possible, but it is also practical.
It is a common history. It is something that helped everyone on this island to live together in the past. And why not in the future?
We are all children of the same God. God wants us, first of all, to love Him, to love God with all our heart, with all our mind, and then to love each other. And this is the will of God. And anybody who hates or who kills is going contrary to the will of God.
Please sing my
So you can see that the young people 10 years ago opened a new chapter with the blessings of the leaders, but they kind of show the way that it's possible. That brought religious leaders back together. A process that began with the Greek Orthodox and the Turkish Muslim. A year later, the Armenian, the Maronite, and the Latin were invited to join. It's a process of only the 5, because these are the ones that are so-called the ones recognized in the constitution. We have opened up another track in the process, where another platform where we've got the other communities in Cyprus, evangelical, Buddhist, Baha'i, Jewish. So you've opened up, but it's a totally different. It's different in the way that they talk, because here the leaders are still following a certain agenda that they developed to contribute to the peace process, and they are not ready to open up their space. So we cannot force that, but they've agreed that there can be another one where there is that community. In this video, for those of you who don't know, there's never ever been in the history of Cyprus where a Greek Orthodox priest officially, with the blessing of the Archbishop, is going into a mosque when there is a Friday prayer, or a Turkish Muslim is entering into the church, and as you saw, that's the part where you walk to get the Holy Communion, and that was not planned by us. He wanted to, so you see the Swedish diplomat is walking behind him, but he suddenly himself, they crossed and got the bread, and even in that one place you can see that they're finishing each other's sentences. So religion and politics got divorced and divided up, even though it's all very much intertwined. We've seen in the process that by acknowledging each other, they're no longer talking about my right versus the other. They advocate for each other's right. They stand up for each other. So you see that the language of human rights, of freedom of religion, has entered into their... It's like the dialogue and the table is also becoming a little bit of a school. You cannot tell a religious leader, I'm educating you, but when they come, they learn. So in the process, they also learn new language and new narrative and new rules. And here, we've been extremely helped by the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, who, I don't know, and we still have to find out. We were talking with Dr. Manocha earlier. He had a visit to Cyprus, a country visit in 2012, which meant that the problematics, we didn't have to do it. The Special Rapporteur and independent expert presented it, which meant that we could use something that was not politically state-wise put or by an NGO, but by the Special Rapporteur. That became our basis. Solutions were given to where can we do. All places of worship should be open. You should have free access. You should be able to pray. You should be able to have the right to administer, the right to fix it. But it was not anymore the Greek Orthodox or the Armenian Orthodox or vice versa fighting against the other with the state and others and foreigners. No, it was the Turkish Cypriot Muslim speaking up to his authorities and saying, we cannot have a church in this state. This is not acceptable, and vice versa. This is risky. The Mufti has been detained for 3 days and has been imprisoned. I have had, and I still do, have a lot of security issues because it's a language that is shaking the most difficult in the place where the conflict is alive. It is not, there's no active killing, but it's there. It's a highly militarized island, and Turkey is right there, and the island divide is under control. We've tried to divide the places of worship in such a way that's handleable. Instead of saying we have no access to all, we have divided those that say there's some that are in military area, that's a different strategy. Those that are being used as mosques, it's a different strategy. And the same with the mosques. So in each case, the most important is that we go slow, that they feel they own it, it's their language, it's their understanding, we guide and facilitate when they can. The role of being places like here or at the UN, in Geneva or in Brussels or in New York is when it's ready and good for the local dialogue to be seen outside. If it helps, we're there. If it doesn't, we don't go. It's not important to run around. So we've had invitations, we've addressed the Human Rights Council, we've addressed, but only when the locals are ready and the local religious leaders. Now, there's a very strong critique because the table is 5 men, leaders, not community, not women, not young people, even though the young people started it. But at the same time, it's important because by making sure that it's a very patriarchal system in Cyprus and very hierarchical. So a priest cannot make a decision if I tell them do this unless the very top decide. So by ensuring that the top is at the table, we're able to now open up to the others. For the first time in the history of the island, we have, and even seculars are not, or those who are working in the peace, NGOs are not doing it. I have priests who are learning Turkish, imams who are learning Greek, parallel in the same course in the buffer zone. We pay for it. But through that, we've started another new layer of togetherness and talking together. So, the opening up and, much more. Every time there is a place of worship that was closed from 1964 or 74, it's opened up. We make sure that if it's a Greek Orthodox one, the Turkish Muslim is present. This became very controversial, but by that person being there shows that I am with you, I acknowledge this right. So there are many first-timers, which I will stop because I don't have time, but at the same time huge challenges. The decisions are not made by the religious leaders, but by the political leaders. So right now the political process is not going well. The 1.5 track, as we call it, our track gets hit tremendously. So if we can't negotiate and get an agreement, that creates huge disappointments in the religious leaders. There is maturity and there is trust among each other, but still, they have to go out and tell their people how this is being perceived. So there's that. Churches are still, or mosques are not administered by the rightful owners. There is no free places to worship. However, as much as we've open new lines and you'll see it, you can see. Together we've got them to look at the missing persons, to look at history. Together they start to make statements on violence against women. Now we're playing something on trafficking. So it's a very new area in Cyprus, and we're keeping the global agenda. So they feel empowered that they're doing something new, but it's very, very fragile at the same time. So we need prayers and we need to stay together, but the most important is the basis of the freedom of religion and the human rights dimension that always stays there. We're not about religion, but we're about human rights. So it's not about doing politics, but making politics possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Thank you for this very interesting and I think insightful presentation of the Cyprus example. I will ask our next speaker, Anna Karen Oz, to speak about maybe the challenges with the refugees. And I think this is interesting particularly because as we Armenian-Georgians and others, our guests here, are trying to see other issues and looking at ourselves from different angles. And I think that's quite valuable.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me say first thank you also to the organizers for providing us with the opportunity to come here and also speak about from the refugees' perspective. So I'm going to speak about refugees and a little bit about UNHCR's journey on how to deal with religion or faith. As you know, UNHCR is a non-political and humanitarian UN agency that is mandated to provide international protection and humanitarian assistance and to seek permanent solutions for refugees, displaced persons and for stateless persons. As we speak today, there is 68.5 million persons displaced in the world today. About 25.4 million are refugees and 40,000 are internally displaced. If you calculate that one, we talk about one person is displaced every 2 seconds. So since we started this session, we're talking about in between 2,000 to 2,500 persons who have become displaced somewhere in the world. Here in Armenia, UNHCR works with about 1,800 people who have been displaced. They mainly originate from Syria, Azerbaijan, Iraq and Iran. But I'm going to speak more today about what we talked about, the beyond perspective. I'm not really going to concentrate on Armenia or Georgia. The grounds to becoming a refugee is known to most people. They also include persecution because of religion. And this is something that was spoken about, how people are denied the religious rights in the first session that we had. And many people cannot return today to their country of origin because of religious violence. And we heard Sean Bichard speaking about three-quarters of all conflicts today being propelled by cultural dimensions, including then religion. If we talk about where are the most refugees, where do they come from? They come from 5 countries. It's Syria, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Myanmar, and Somalia. And most of those are cultural conflicts, including religion. So I said that UNHCR is a non-political and humanitarian United Nations agency. We adhere strictly to the humanitarian principles: humanity, neutrality, impartiality. So we are a secular organization. But to be a secular organization and dealing with refugees does not mean that we can ignore religion. As I said, some of the persons who we deal with have fled their homes because of religious persecution and violence. We have been working with faith-based organizations of different sorts ever since the 1950s. In response to displacement emergencies, but also to find solutions for refugees. And this has sometimes led to complications and misunderstandings from both sides, perhaps because we didn't understand and listen to each other fully. Humanitarian actors, including UNHCR, were sometimes focusing on the challenges in cooperation. We were holding human rights and humanitarian principles and taking a strictly rights-based approach. And we were shying away and looking at other sides, other perspectives of faith, both from the partners that we were working with and also the persons that we were working with. We're looking at the red lines that we saw as unacceptable, being against our principles. So we were seeing that some religious entities were showing antagonism or exclusion towards persons of different faiths. We were looking at individuals who, from different faith communities that were expressing hate or preaching religion or pressuring conversion or as a precondition for support and access and assistance, or engaging in practices that we didn't agree with, like early marriage and other harmful traditions, or gender stereotypes, specifically violations of rights of women and boys and girls, or who were attributing stigma and discrimination against sexual minorities, which was also mentioned in the opening statement by the Dutch ambassador. However, time after time, it was also noted that faith-based entities play an important role, and there's a need for humanitarian actors, including UNHCR, to deepen our understanding of religious traditions across faiths and become, how should I say, more faith literate. This means not only understanding what central role faith plays in the communities that we work with, but also more concretely looking into faith structures and networks, and of the different approaches needed to effectively to engage with faith-based actors. So UNHCR started a journey of mutual discovery with faith-based organizations, and we were also looking at how does faith play in humanitarian responses in finding solutions to displacement. In 2012, then was our High Commissioner, Antonio Guterres, called together a dialogue on protection challenges under the theme Faith and Protection. So in this dialogue, you had more than 400 representatives from different faiths, faith-based organizations, and also other leaders to discuss this issue in Geneva. It was the first time ever we, as an organization, engaged in this kind of dialogue, and we also explored the common values supporting the notion of refugee protections in all the world's major religions. So it gave us quite a lot of interesting insight in both how can we work better with partners who are faith-based, and also how can we better support and serve the people that we work for, the refugees and the displaced persons. The dialogue actually initiated a process of a document that it's the Affirmation of Welcome document. and welcoming a stranger. And it was affirmations of faith leaders. And this was signed and endorsed by more than 1,700 religious leaders and members of faith communities, organizations, in a signing process then in 2013 at the Religions for Peace 9th World Assembly in Vienna. I like the starting of the document. It's a long document. It's available on our websites and you can have a look. But the document starts by saying, a core value of my faith is to welcome the stranger, the refugee, the internally displaced, the other. I shall treat him or her as I would like to be treated. I will challenge others, even leaders of my own faith community, to do the same. It underpins the value or principles of hospitality, respect, and equality. We also went a little bit further and developed guidance for our own staff on how to deal with faith-based entities in our work. I'm not a religious person myself, but since I started working with UNHCR some 22 years ago, I worked with refugees and displaced persons in 8 different countries and met with them in many more. And slowly I had come to realize also then how important faith is for a person in a displacement situation. Listening to their stories, witnessing their daily struggle in exile, there's few things that are so powerful as a person's faith. It helps them cope with fear, loss, separation, and destitution. It's also central to faith, and faith is also central to resilience. It's very often the key in enabling a refugee to overcome their trauma, to make sense of the loss, and to rebuild their lives from nothing. It also provides a person a collective support among victims, and it gives them possibility to be member of a community. And I mean, we're in Armenia now, and I think the Armenian experience is a clear sign on that. And I still remember, I started out working with UNHCR in Tanzania, and I was dealing with refugees displaced from Rwanda. And then my next duty station was, I was working in Turkey, in Ankara, and suddenly there I come across Alice. Alice was a Rwandan Tutsi who, for some reason, had ended up in Turkey. She was a very religious woman from the Seventh-day Adventist community. And there was no Seventh-day Adventists in Turkey. And I felt the connection to her because I had been working with Rwandan refugees in Tanzania before. So we started looking what churches are available in Ankara. No Seventh-day. And then suddenly one day she came to me and said, look, you gave me the list of churches. I went to each one of them and I found one where I feel at home. And they don't care that I am a Seventh-day Adventist. They still welcome me. They say, come in and we'll host you. You can be here. You can pray in your way. And this was enormous relief for her, and she felt part of the community. So I think we need to step away from being strictly rights-based. We need to look at the bigger picture. And we also need to recognize that asylum and protection is not only provided by the state based on legal provisions. The receiving community plays a central role in transforming the rights to enjoy asylum in the reality. And to realize integration in a new community, it also means that you need to be accepted and not discriminated based on your religious values. So, how did we work in reality then to see the benefits of this engagement with faith-based entities? What we have realized is that faith-based entities provide physical protection and facilitate humanitarian access. It's very often in the faith-based buildings where we find refugees. If there has been a mass influx of persons very suddenly, where the international community, the state, has not had the ability to prepare and respond in advance. When I have been going out in such communities during my career also, it is the temples, it is the mosques and the churches where you will find them. Faith-based communities have also been able to provide or work as a deterrent for violence through presence and accompaniment. We have seen examples where one faith community has gone out, sat down and protected another faith community to prevent displacement, to prevent violence. Very often also faith-based entities play a role in mediating tensions between refugees and displaced persons if they happen to be of different faiths. And this is very important, and it's also applicable for the mediating conflicts between the local community and the refugees. And at the same time, it's also a huge opportunity for further dialogue across faiths. But we have to be prepared then to go in, be curious, and ask questions to try to understand the other side. And as was described by Salpi here also, faith-based communities are extremely important in engaging in reconciliation and peace-building activities. Combating xenophobia and violence. This is also an important thing where we believe that faith-based organizations should get involved. Our current High Commissioner was speaking in April to the Security Council, and he was saying that the current stigmatization of refugees and migrants was unprecedented. And I'll quote him here. I have been an international civil servant, and I have worked with refugees for well over 3 decades. In my career, in this field of work, I have seen much solidarity, even heroism, in some responses that are provided on the ground with the support of the Security Council. Make no mistake, I see this solidarity still very strong, and I go around the world and talk about this issue every day in my country. However, over the course of these 3.5 decades, I have never seen such toxicity, such poison in the language of politics, in the media and social media, and even in everyday discussions and conversations around this issue. The toxicity often focuses, sadly, tragically, on refugees, migrants, and foreigners. That should be of concern for us all. Unfortunately, this language of politics has become ruthless, giving license to discrimination, racism, and xenophobia. And refugees and migrants, often the others, because they belong to a different faith, have become the target and casualties of power-driven agendas. Political leadership should strive to unite, but now, these days, it prides itself on dividing. We have to go back to the key principles of humanitarian work. We must respond to need, not creed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for both presentations. I think I won't be mistaken if I say that both of you have actually brought up some of your very important emotional experiences into the equation, which made this, I think, a much better understood, because we are talking about very complex issues at the same time trying to bring it into the level of how we dialogue between faiths and how we deal with this. Using my prerogative of being the host in this case, I have one question to each of our speakers. One is, if you have to, so I will make it a little bit, regionalize it and put it in our context. When it comes to the conflicts here in South Caucasus, whether it's Karabakh, Abkhazia, or Ossetia, we always say that there is no religious part of it. Whether it's, it's somewhat true. Are we avoiding things, or is this a reality from what you know? And can the idea of bringing religion into the equation as part of the dialogue be a good thing, or can it spoil things? Based on the Cyprus experience, if you could try to put it in the context of ours. And of course, getting back to the basically faith communities and refugees, IDPs or displaced people in general, we're actually seeing a lot of the Middle Eastern rays of different religious organizations, religious groups, sometimes radicalizing. Can we as a region, or can we as an example, play somewhat of a positive role of how things can move forward? I mean, can we here, Georgians, Armenians, and others here, living with our own issues, with our own religious groups, obviously, but can we become somehow a model of how the coexistence is possible?
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. I think, first of all, as much as we said in Cyprus, and I think it's the same in South Caucasus, at least the knowledge that I know there, yes, religion, the conflict is not religious, but religion is already part of the equation. How many times do we hear, either formally or informally, a religious person, a priest, imam or whatever, use language or talk about the conflict or bless the soldier or come into, you can, I mean, it is there. So you see the language all the time, both formally and informally. The question is, how can we turn that equation that it accepts in a way, when the same as we're accepting the refugee or the migrant, how do you accept the other, the image of the other, in such a way that your scriptures, in this case, in our case, we're dealing with a monotheistic religions, so we don't have, as far as the conflict is concerned, that you're accepting the right of the other as far as the faith is concerned as you would accept yours. So you won't say we've had cases where we had to look at the speeches or the sermons of the religious leaders. If that sermon includes an element of hatred in a way that, or a blessing in such a way that will also can be transported to hatred to the other group, then you come back and you look at it and discuss with them what does it mean with the, within the context of freedom of religion. If where you in a way there we divorce religion from the conflict, but bring it back in with the human rights concept. So religion is not out of the equation. Religion is there. The question is how it's used. So, for example, last this Easter, I had a huge conflict because the encyclical that the Greek Orthodox Church Cyprus did on Easter talks about as an element where it's addressing the political situation. In that element, that language that was used there is something that we need to now discuss, come back to the table, because that language that was put there hurt the other. So now the question is to go back, to bring the table back into the closed doors. Language sensitivity is very important. So the equation, it's not that they were not there, we were avoiding. Now, in a way, I can imagine if you're avoiding it, it's because it's very difficult. And unless there is a solid buy-in from, depending on the structure, in our case it was leadership, but either leadership or around, and you're able to get them to understand why what would they gain by that? They would be there, then I understand why you would be avoiding it. But
often the avoiding is often not to actually draw more attention on the religious aspect of it, as much as we can avoid. During the wars that we've had here, it was there. But it's very interesting about language sensitivity, I think, and how, whether we like it or not, religion actually continuously plays a role and promotes some of the already existing stereotypes. Thank you. Can we be a model or not?
Can we be a model or not? I think anybody can be a model.
Positive model?
Positive model. I wanted actually I'll add something to what Sophie was saying actually in that regard, and I think this is going back a little bit to what the Prime Minister was saying when he was opening our section. Because, I mean, the truth is, what I have observed, the truth is, I cannot tell the truth. But when it comes to situations where religion is used to undermine the rights of people, It's usually not done by religious leaders, it's politicians who use religion for their purposes. I don't know if you agree or disagree. This is hopefully something that will spark discussion, because this is what the Prime Minister was referring to also, is that there's no dividing lines between religions. The lines are drawn by people who are interpreting religion. And yes, I think in that sense, I think this region can become a model, because it's by talking and understanding each other and not drawing lines that this region can become a model, I would say.